So our final presentation before the Q&A will be from Toussaint Nothias, the Associate Director of Research at the Digital Civil Society Lab and a social research scholar at the Stanford Center on Philanthropy and Civil Society. Toussaint, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Robert. I know it's quite a mouthful. So I want to start by thanking everyone who's watching first. I hope you're safe and coping as well as you can with the current events. I also want to extend my thanks to Hélène and the organizing committee for this invitation and all the people who made the symposium possible. David, Robert, Luciano, Samantha, Luisa. I'm sure I'm forgetting someone, but thank you so much. And lastly, I want to thank the previous presenters for their really great talks. I learned a lot. I'm inspired by the work they're doing. And I think each in their own way offered compelling examples of what digitization can do for cultural heritage institutions and why cultural digitization is so important. But the presentations also provided insights into various challenges and pitfalls that cultural digitization faces. And I think that one thing that is emerging through several of these presentations is that the challenges are not just technical, but they are social, historical, and political. And they're quite massive. And that's kind of what I want to dig into in my presentation today. I want to continue expanding on the sort of challenges part of this debate. And in particular, I want to bring to the forefront of the discussion the idea of digital colonialism that I was so glad to see Carla and Mark mention. This idea has become a growing area of concern for digital rights activists across the global south, and also for scholars across a range of disciplines, including sociology, anthropology, development studies, computer science, law, and communication studies, to name a few. In my presentation, I will focus on one initiative that has been heralded as the perfect example of digital colonialism, a project developed by Facebook to increase digital access across the world. My talk will concentrate on the history of this initiative and its impacts on and reception by local communities, first in India and then across Africa. And then I will close by fleshing out some of the implications that this story, and more broadly the debate about digital colonialism, have for cultural digitization. So it's going to be a bit of a step aside from the strict focus on cultural digitization, but I invite you to join me in that story. And as I go through it, to think about how some of the themes that I'm walking through connect to your own work and your own research. Themes of access, cross-sector partnerships, the imperative of digitization, question of cultural biases and accountability to communities, and three big questions: what is public, what is private, and who gets to decide? I'm going to go right into it. I'll just say what looks like a very nice office behind me is actually a garage without heating. So if you see me rubbing my hand, it's because it's actually very cold in California right now for me. All right, so let's get into that story. For most of the world's population, digital connectivity still remains too expensive, inaccessible, or unreliable. In response to the digital divide, we've seen many tech corporations like Google, Facebook, and Microsoft investing in various projects and cross-sector partnerships to increase connectivity across the global south. And one of the most noticeable and controversial of these initiatives is a project by Facebook called Free Basics. I'm going to take you back to August 2013, when Mark Zuckerberg released a white paper titled "Is Connectivity a Human Right?" And thinking back to 2013, think how much the image of a company like Facebook, how different it was from what it is today. At the time, about 5 billion people were not connected to the internet. And Zuckerberg outlined a strategic vision to increase global connectivity. He presented this vision as largely philanthropic, and actually he explicitly challenged any profit motive behind the corporation's concern for the digital divide. Zuckerberg used the following analogy to describe one of the key initiatives that they had in their vision. Just as citizens may dial 911 in case of emergency, Facebook wanted to create a similar dial tone for the internet, where everyone could access some basic services free of data charges without having to pay to connect to the internet. And this was the simple idea behind Facebook Free Basics, to provide mobile users, especially in sort of low connectivity rural areas, access to data light websites free of data charges. So on Free Basics, and you see Free Basics here on the right of the screen, people get access to a selection of sites, such as weather forecasts, news websites, and of course Facebook. And these are text-based versions of these sites. meaning that there's no video. At best, there are only low-quality images. Now, Facebook presented this as a win-win strategy for different stakeholders. For users in areas where internet is expensive or limited, this would expand their access. Local governments would be able to develop services compatible with free basics to reach more people for things such as public health and education. Same thing for nonprofit and civil society organizations working in fields as diverse as the arts, agriculture, gender justice, and education. And this was really launched initially as a cross-sector coalition project. Within a year, Facebook started rolling out the initiative smoothly in several countries, including first Zambia, then Tanzania, Kenya, and Ghana. But in 2015, the launch of the initiative in India did not go as planned, to say the least. When Free Basics rolled out in India, a group of local activists forcefully opposed it. They argued that Facebook acted as a gatekeeper of the internet by pre-selecting services available on the app without transparency or public oversight. They also said that the list of services on Free Basics contained linguistic and cultural biases that favored Anglo-American content over local content. Contrary to Facebook's philanthropic framing of the initiative, the activists said that Facebook had clear commercial incentives. At the time, 1 billion people in India were not yet online, and so this was a tremendous opportunity for Facebook to grow its user base in the country. The activists also had privacy concerns since Free Basics did not support the secure HTTPS protocol, and for them that really showed that Facebook was primarily concerned with pushing its product, pushing its brand, even at the expense of the user's online safety. And it's in this context that claims of digital colonialism started to emerge, in particular with reference to that debate going on in India. Put in simple terms, the idea of digital colonialism holds that Western tech corporations today play a role reminiscent or similar to role played by former colonial powers. They arrange infrastructures, digital infrastructure, to fit their economic needs. They're extractive and involved in the global exploitation of low-wage workers from marginalized and racialized communities, be them content moderators, Uber drivers, or warehouse workers. These tech corporations are spreading peculiar cultural practices and ways of experiencing the world and culture that reflect the biases of a small group of largely white, male, and American software engineers. And all of this is being done in the name of progress, development, and doing good. So as I said in my introduction, this idea of digital colonialism has been picking up steam both among activists and scholars, and Carl and Mark mentioned it too. And here on the right, you see the name of just a few of the people that have been writing about this in the last 2 years, actually. Sarita Amrute is an anthropologist, the director of research at the think tank Data and Society, gave an important keynote on tech colonialism. Abeba Biran is a computer scientist who talked about the algorithmic colonization of Africa. Coleman is a legal scholar who talked about the new digital scramble for the continent. Michael Quet is a sociologist. Nicole and Mejas are social theorists who talk about this idea of data colonialism. So there's a lot of momentum around these ideas across different fields that all have in common to talk about the digital ecosystem that we're developing. And one of the most recent contribution to this debate is from AI researchers, Shakir Mohammed, Marie-Therese Pning, and William Isaac, who published a paper on decolonial AI. And within that, and they're lead researcher in the field of AI, they were calling on the AI community to, and I quote here, develop foresight and tactics that can better align research and technology development with established ethical principles, centering vulnerable people who continue to bear the brunt of negative impacts of innovation and scientific progress. Okay, that's a lot. Let me come back for a second to India and Free Basics. After a year-long and very highly publicized national debate, the Indian telecom regulator decided to ban Free Basics in the country and other similar offers. Now, this ban was really widely perceived in 2015 as a massive blow to Facebook. To many observers, the pushback signaled the end of that project. And in my research, what you see here on the screen is actually the amount of media attention for Free Basics in the news. And you see this spike of interest around the debate in India, and then it dies down as if the project had stopped. But this is actually very misleading. In fact, and this is what I've been working on for the last 2 years, Facebook moved forward with the project around the world, and particularly across the African continent. By 2020, it had expanded to at least 32 countries across Africa. Now, to me, this raised an important question. Why didn't we see more pushback across these countries, like the type of pushback we saw in India? Or why wasn't there more of a spillover effect from the India debate to these other parts of the world? And in my research, I'll be brief here because I know we're running short on time. But to understand why there hasn't necessarily been that much of a pushback in this context, I think there are two key phenomena to understand here. The first one is Facebook evolving strategy, which included growing engagement with civil society organizations. And then the second phenomenon is that digital rights activists were actually facing and battling a range of other issues that were more pressing. So let me break down these two very quickly. The first thing that really focuses on Facebook evolving strategy. Following the India debacle, Facebook increased its engagement with local civil society groups. Notably in partnership with a South African NGO called the Prackle Foundation, it launched an incubator to proactively onboard 100 social organizations onto the platform. And this included large organizations like the World Food Programme or the UNHCR, but it also involved digitally oriented, primarily South Africa-based civil society organizations who are really a leader in that space on the continent. Code for Africa, Amon Lamobi, or Africa Check. And in a way, in doing that, Facebook sort of captured some of the actors that could have led the charge against such a project. There are different parts to this evolving strategy. I'll share a link to my full article for people if you're also inclined to read a bit about this. But some of the other things that they did was responding and doing some changes to the platform, but also investing in other communities of developers and software engineers, particularly in Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa, where they've been pushing a lot of connectivity initiatives. They've also interacted more with digital rights community themselves, working on issues like misinformation, fact-checking, online safety. And here again, building links with communities who might pose a challenge to some of these projects. And then the last thing, which I think is really important and people don't really know about, is that Facebook has also been investing in connectivity and infrastructural projects. These include fiber optic cables in South Africa, Uganda, and Nigeria, internet exchange points with the Internet Society, which is a nonprofit. And in May 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, Facebook announced plans to construct what you see on the right here, which is a subsea fiber optic cable surrounding the entire continent. And so, it's always good to be reminded that when we talk about the cloud is actually under the sea, because that's how the internet works and is connected throughout the world, most of the traffic. So we're seeing these investments from big tech corporation here. The second aspect, I'll be very brief, is the broader political and regulatory landscape shaping the advocacy agenda of digital rights activists. Across the continent, you've had several authoritarian, semi-authoritarian governments using radical strategies like internet shutdowns, social media taxes, cyber security laws violating privacy and attacking free speech, arrest of bloggers. And so these have really constituted more pressing threats, meaning that activists who care about digital privacy and liberty have had a lot of work to do on that front. Today, FreeBasics is active in more than 60 countries around the world. It is difficult to precisely assess how many people are using it and what they're using it for primarily. Facebook purposefully remains coy about the program's reach and its impact when faced with questions from scholars, activists, and journalists, repeated questions. One of the last numbers that they disclosed was that by 2018, it had contributed to bring 100 million people online. Several nonprofits that opted to join FreeBasics have also released some of the numbers. They've seen very impressive growth. Here you have two examples. One is from a UNICEF-led initiative where they basically said that they reached people in 63 countries and 32 million users. And then the other one is from the Nike Foundation Girl Effect, where they talked about 25 million users by 2016 and 1.3 million unique users each month. So these are pretty large numbers, but they don't tell us much about the actual impact of the program on people's lives, on culture, on media production, or about the impact of FreeBasics on these organizations themselves. And so in my research, what I've been doing is looking specifically at FreeBasics in Kenya. And I found that the services with the most prominent placement were Euro-American sites like ESPN, BBC News, Bing, AccuWeather, or Baby Center, which is owned by Johnson & Johnson. The overwhelming majority of these services are offered in English only, and Kenyan websites represent only a small fraction of the sites available. Researchers from a collective called Global Voices did similar study, and they found similar biases and lack of attention to local context. So I'm reaching my conclusion here. The evidence from several reports and qualitative studies, and also from my discussion with users of Free Basics in Kenya and South Africa, suggest that people use Free Basics primarily to access Facebook. It shouldn't come as a surprise, but it really goes against the narrative that was sold to a lot of the partners. In fact, in several countries, Free Basics was promoted as free Facebook. And so really this observation vindicates the argument initially raised by the Indian activists. Far from philanthropic, this initiative primarily contributes to Facebook global expansion in emerging markets. Today, many small cultural heritage institutions rely on a handful of American social media corporations to expand audience engagement. And the pandemic has only heightened this trend. Social media platforms may provide a range of immediate gains for these institutions: more clicks, more views and traffic, greater online interactivity, increase in fundraising, and other forms of advantages such as technical assistance to create new experiences. But it is harder to perceive what may be lost in the process. But the digital colonialism argument, I think, helps us shed light on this. Cultural digitization cannot be divorced from broader social digitization. And the idea of digital colonialism forces us to consider the broader digital ecosystem that we are building and enabling, and within which cultural digitization is happening. Digital colonialism raises crucial issues of sovereignty and ownership, such as who owns the data, who benefits from it, and how that links to much longer patterns of global inequalities. It invites us to reconsider the extractive logics of the digital industry and its linguistic and cultural biases. Because that's what you see on the screen here, my friends, is anything but, it's the broader context. Both Google and Facebook building fiber optic cables, investing in areas of the industry that are kind of new, a new layer. And this is anything but democratic. And so, I want to leave you with this, which is that that critique of digital colonialism is picking up steam. We need to pay attention to it. But it's not only a defensive route. It's also a route that opens up a liberatory path towards alternative digital futures that center equity, dignity, and reciprocity. And I think Mark and Carla, I'm really thankful to you for talking to us a bit about how you did that. So on that note, I'll stop here. My apologies for going slightly over the hour, and hopefully you can take some questions. Thank you.